The Boston School Department plans a new budget with a record high in local spending after years of declining support from the state. To tell us about the budget and plans for new programs is the CFO of the Boston Public Schools, Eleanor Laurans. Thank you very much for being with us, Eleanor.
Thanks for having me.
I want to start with some of the things you're putting more money into in this budget. And one thing I know the city is focusing on even more nowadays is access to preschool. How does the budget address that?
Unfortunately, this current year is the last year in the federal preschool expansion grant. So thanks to the support from the mayor, we are making up for that shortfall, adding $3.8 million to maintain progress we've had in recent years for quality pre-K seats in Boston.
Every year we hear there's more access to preschool, but I guess there are a lot of people who still don't have that access too, right?
We're making steady progress every year. The mayor's been advocating at the state for the kind of big change in funding that we need to get all the way to the finish line, but we're making progress every year.
Of course, another thing is about the up and down of the budget. Every year I hear the city's putting more money into this. Different story with the state. Put that into perspective.
In the last 6 years, under the mayor's leadership, we've had a 25% increase in our per pupil funding on our general fund. So we've gone from $16,500 per student, now we'll be nearing $21,000 next year. Again, we're making steady progress. We're able to make new investments every year. But in the last 10 years, going back to 2010, we went from having 20% of our budget come from the state to next year we're expecting it just to be 4%. So we have a real tale of two funding sources here. The city is making up for the shortfalls at the state level, and there's a very active conversation happening right now at the state about how we fund our schools in Massachusetts.
Well, of course, another thing going on is as more of the state aid to Boston goes to charter schools, BPS enrollment is down, charter school enrollment is up. So a lot of people are saying, well, that sounds pretty reasonable, but how reasonable is that?
When the charter law was put into place, the state acknowledged that there are transition costs associated with the growth of charters, and unfortunately the state hasn't met its obligation in a line that's called charter reimbursement. And so we'd really like the state to fulfill its obligation on the charter reimbursement costs.
Of course, there are different ideas about how to increase state funding, even though there is a lot of agreement to do that. The governor has one proposal. How would the Boston Public Schools do under that?
Not well. Similar to how today's funding systems work, Boston wouldn't benefit under the governor's proposal.
Because another problem that I think this budget is trying to address, at least partially, is high school students who are not on track to graduate on time. There was a report about that recently. So what's going to be new about that in this year's budget?
We've done two things. We have some central investments in supports that we think schools will benefit from, technology to help kids stay on track, to help the adults who are supporting them have data at their fingertips. And then we have $1.6 million more that we're funneling into our high school budgets. There was a report by EY Parthenon about our off-track youth, and we're starting to implement some of the financial recommendations that were in that report. We are sending more money to our schools who are serving the highest concentration of kids who are at risk for falling off track.
And of course, I guess one of the things you're looking at is pathways to graduation. What does that mean? That
means that one size doesn't fit all. Right? Different kids need different things, and we need to equip the adults who are serving those kids with information and resources and different choices so that we have a solution so that every child can graduate career and college ready.
Another issue we've heard a lot about recently is access to exam schools. There is a mismatch between student enrollment and city population, even BPS population. So any plans to at least narrow that a bit?
Yeah, you're right. The diversity of our exam schools does not reflect the diversity of the rest of our school district. And we've been working for a number of years to change that. And we have a new proposal that's part of the FY20 budget, which is ISEE, which is the exam, which is to get into exam schools, to be administered in a child's home school in their classroom. So instead of today's system where we ask families to arrive on a Saturday, we will be doing it in the school day in this child's classroom. And we're hoping that that breaks down more barriers and increases access to our exam schools for more students and new populations who haven't found it accessible in the past.
Of course, in recent years, we also heard about students being asked questions on the exam school test about things that they were not taught in their regular classes. I guess in recent years, maybe the city has been trying to address that too?
That is a topic that's also getting attention. This particular budget has focused on access to the test. I think we have important conversations ahead of us about the test itself.
Of course, another thing going on is making sure that the schools or the students with the greatest needs get more attention in the budget. There were formulas for that. Explain how that works.
This is something that we care so deeply about. And one of my most important jobs is to think about how we take the money we have and slice it up in ways that can be as fair as possible. We've spent a lot of time in the last couple of years thinking how to do that. Last year, we introduced a new tool that we call the Opportunity Index. We said, the tools we have today are too blunt. They do not give us enough nuance to understand where need is. So we engaged some academics from Northeastern and Harvard. We said, help us find every piece of data that we can that predicts where the most need is in our schools. And we're slowly allocating more and more money according to that data and those tools now.
Now, of course, another thing about the breakdown, I see some schools that have a lot of students with need are getting a lot more money, and some students with some schools with a lot of students with needs, and they're getting a lot less money. How can that happen?
We try to be as transparent and equitable as we can be. We know this is a charged and emotional issue for people. We believe that the way to be most fair and most transparent is by using formulas where we identify need and we give more money to the students depending on their need. So special education is the single biggest swing that determines why one student would get more money than another. But there are a number of other factors. Poverty, whether the child is learning English, whether a student is off track towards graduation. We take all of those kind of factors into account and then decide how much money each school is getting.
Another thing I noticed in the breakdown is that more money is going into parent engagement, the welcome centers. Everybody agrees parent engagement is a good thing, but what's going on here that's new?
Well, we're trying to make our welcome centers more welcoming. We're trying to help our schools engage parents and bring them into the school community even more. And we're trying to get positive messages out there about all the great things that are happening in the Boston Public Schools.
Well, it's also interesting to see about catching up on science instructions. We have a new STEM-centered school in Roxbury. So a lot of money is going in. So how's that going to be used?
We are excited to be rolling out an investment of over $375,000 in science instruction. This will be a combination of content, manipulatives, professional development for teachers. There's a lot that we can do in this area.
And of course, another big if, it might not be decided all that soon, is the next contract with the Boston Teachers Union. I guess you're holding something in reserve there for that as well?
Yeah, that's an important point to make. The budget we have in front of us now is a 2.4% increase over last year's. That is before we have a new contract with the teachers union. So when we do reach an agreement with the BTU, we will get a supplement from the city. They're the ones who actually hold that in reserve, and our appropriation will go up at that point.
I have to admit, I've only had a short look at some of your breakdowns in the budget, and it's fascinating to see how much money is used for what kind of things, including transportation. You've got a website, so we should tell people about that.
Oh, yes, please. We would love for people to take a look. Transparency is so important to us. Encouraging dialogue is so important. If you want to know more about the BPS budget, go to www.bostonpublicschools.org/explore-budget.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Eleanor Laurans from the Boston Public Schools. Up ahead, school sports with Pat Flaherty.